The Nick Scott Effect. The Nick Scott Effect. Available on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Facebook Watch, and everywhere podcasts are found. Interview requests and show notes available at djnickscott.com.
I don't know how your TikTok showed up on my For You page. I have no clue.
Hashtag FYP.
Hashtag FYP. That's right. But so I was sitting there scrolling, and you popped up. Now, most of my TikTok viewing is comedy. Like, I love the comedy skits and so forth on there. But yours, you were breaking. I forget which TikTok it was, but you were talking about the different books that you used to teach out of. And you were like, the one thing that intrigued me is you were like, do you know about the Book of Enoch? And I know about the Book of Enoch. A lot of people, I'd say most Christians don't know about the Book of Enoch. I was like, okay, this guy knows a little something. And then I started a deep dive. And it just hit me. I was like, I wonder if I could get this cat to talk on my podcast. So I have to tell you, I'm so thankful and grateful for you to accepting my invitation.
Absolutely, dude. I'm really I'm thankful to you also for reaching out. I love opportunities to just talk, especially since we both have unique perspectives. I think it'll be make for good conversation. So I really appreciate you being willing and open to talk, man.
Well, that's one thing I wanted to make very clear to you, because you don't know me from Adam, and you've posted a lot of this on your TikTok. I see Christians, for a lack of better word, attacking you, and I don't agree with that at all. You know the Bible as well as I do, or anyone else. If we're supposed to live a Christ-like life, attacking one another is not a part of that code, in my opinion. So I wanted you to feel comfortable that you could come on and shoot the crap with me without feeling like I'm going to get you some gotcha moments. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I really appreciate that. Yeah, I could tell by your email and demeanor and stuff that I had nothing to be afraid of.
Oh, good. So, right off the bat, I want to hear your military service story, because I think that is incredible.
Okay.
So if you don't mind, and share whatever you feel comfortable sharing.
Absolutely, sure. Yeah. So in 2001, December, I turned 18. And so that was just 3 months after 9/11 had happened. And through high school, I went to a Christian school and played in all Christian sports and everything like that. But I always had a lot of interest in military subjects and military movies, the whole bravery aspect of it, and glory and travel and all that stuff. So I knew I wanted to be either a pararescue jumper, a Navy SEAL, or something like that. That was what I wanted. But after 9/11 happened, I wanted to join the Marine Corps, or I wanted to join the military as fast as I could, because I was just so pumped up about the prospect of standing up for our country and defending us from all the so-called attacks, regardless of the narrative behind all that, with the separation between Iraq and Afghanistan. That's a whole other story. But
absolutely, yeah.
But I signed right up, and first I went to the Air Force and then the Army, and I was trying to see who could get me out the fastest. And the Marine Corps recruiter sold me. He's like, "Look, I can get you in boot camp in like a month. I can get you. You want to go over and fight bad guys? I can get you out of here to do that very quickly." So I joined the Marine Corps. And actually, just random side note, both of my parents were Air Force officers. My older sister was in the Air Force, and my two younger brothers are both in the Air Force, and they're all like intelligence linguists. Wow. But I was the oldest boy, and I wasn't interested in that. I wanted to go be in the field and carry the guns and do all that stuff. So I joined the infantry in February 12th of 2002, and I became an infantry machine gunner. And there's so many experiences I could share with you, but I guess you could say long story short, we can dive back into whatever you want. But I was in for 13 years, and during that time, I was a machine gunner, a combat instructor, a counterintelligence specialist, and then a light armored reconnaissance platoon sergeant. And I traveled to over 25 countries, did three deployments, 2 combat deployments. And ultimately, I think the biggest, the thing most people are interested in is my experience in Iraq, because I was on the front lines in the Battle of Fallujah, which was in 2004, November. and that ended up becoming the bloodiest battle of the Iraq War. There was many military units there, but just my unit of 150 Marines, we lost 53 were injured, and 13 were killed. And it was just a very, very, very tough time. And while we were there, we had New York Times embedded reporters with us, so we were on the on the news all the time, and they were writing articles and taking pictures. And so because of that, me and my buddies ended up on a lot of book covers and documentaries, and our pictures are in the Marine Corps Museum and things like that. And yeah, that was just an experience in itself. I could talk for hours just about that battle. After that,
amazing.
Go ahead.
No. I was just going to tell you that's absolutely amazing. One side note: if you could turn your mic down just a touch,
sure.
You're modulating just a hair. It's all good.
Is that better?
That's better. I'm an audio nerd, so.
Oh no, good. I'm glad. I like that. Yeah.
So, funny side note is, it looks like as soon as that 13 years was up, the hair grew out. Is that what happened?
Pretty much. Yeah, man. My whole life, I was forced to keep it, like military regulations, because my dad was very, very, very strict. And in the Marine Corps, of course, you have to keep it short. So I kept it short for a couple more years, but about 2 years ago, I finally was like, I want to grow this thing out and see what it looks like, And I didn't even know my hair was curly, wavy, and stuff until just this last year or two. So
that's amazing. I can't get past this part right here. This part when it starts to get long drives me nuts. That's
it's annoying.
The part I can't get over.
It is.
But if you're comfortable with it, So I have a lot of friends in the military. Mm-hmm. I have some friends who were in Iraq with the Army. One was a Ranger, and then I believe he went Ranger, Green Beret, or something along. But he went.
That sounds right.
He went 3 times. One time infantry, one time Ranger, one time Green Beret, and then they basically retired him out because he had some obvious psychological challenges afterwards. And to this day, he receives help. Great kid. I grew up with him. But he's told me some stories that'll make your skin crawl. And I'm sure I was actually talking to a friend of mine this afternoon about this podcast. I was like, Mr. Best is coming on. And when it comes to someone's military service or someone who's been in combat, someone who is fighting for their life, I don't have a frame of reference for you. I've never been in that situation. I can't act like I know what that's like because I have no clue. So I always try to approach these questions with the utmost respect. So I don't want you to feel uncomfortable in any way.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm very, very open and comfortable. I had to learn when I first got back from that battle specifically and got back to the United States and was talking to family and friends about it. I learned pretty quickly that my sense of humor and my approach to the battle was not the same as everyone else's. And when you're in a situation like that for a long period of time, and we're in consecutive firefights. 4, 5, 6 firefights a day for 46 days. So that's why I say I was in over 280 firefights, and that wasn't just me; it was all of us. So you really develop a very different mindset. And it's sort of a defense mechanism is the best way I can probably label it. And there's books written about the combat mindset and how it affects people. But you kind of develop a disassociative sense of humor to try and I guess cope with the realities of what you're seeing and experiencing. And so when I got back from Marine Corps jokes are really dark, really dark humor. So when I got back from Iraq and I started to share some of my stories and some of the things that I thought were interesting or funny with my family, I learned pretty quickly that it wasn't funny to them. And they were, at the end, I'm like, doo-doo, and they're like, did that actually happen? I'm like, well, yeah, but it's funny. And they're like, no, it's not funny.
Yeah.
But over time, of course, as, time went by and I started to reintegrate into normal thinking in society, I realized I do have to be kind of a little bit more careful about, being too graphic with things. And of course, my own sensitivities is returned. Things I used to think were funny aren't really funny to me anymore. But so I've kind of learned what to stay away from and what not to. But I'm generally very, very open about all of it because I think it's important for other veterans who have also been through that kind of stuff to connect with it and relate to it.
Oh, absolutely. Now, did you were you wounded, Purple Heart, anything like that, or?
I didn't get a Purple Heart. I took a little shrapnel to the side of my face, and I didn't get any Purple Heart or anything for it. I know that I could have, and I know a lot of people could have gotten. And now people can get Purple Hearts for like concussion if their convoy was hit with an IED and they're in the truck behind and they got bad headaches. You can get a Purple Heart. In that battle, no one was what's it called? No one was submitted for Purple Hearts unless they were injured to the extent that they were pulled out of the battle. So we had guys losing their hands and legs and organs and stuff like that. And when you're in that scenario, when you take a little bit of peppering to the side of your face from some shrapnel, you're just like, I ain't got time to bleed, and then, even worse when you get back to the rear or when you back to the administrative areas and stuff after the battle, you're sitting here with all your buddies, 53 of them who are seriously effed up, and 13 who are dead, and you the last thing you think of is like, hey, I'm gonna go run over to BAS and try and submit myself for a Purple Heart. That just seems like the stupidest thing. So I never got any Purple Heart, no. But
let me ask you what took you out of the military after 13 years. Was that just your time was up, or you felt like it was time to move on? I mean, it sounds like a pretty established and honorable military career.
It was. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. It was. I did well. I got meritoriously promoted 2 times.
Oh, wow. Congratulations.
Thank you. What really brought me out of it was a deep hatred for how do I put this? There's a lot of hypocrisy that goes on, and since my entire adult life up to the point that I got out was completely encapsulated by my military and Marine Corps experience, I always sort of had this idea that once I get out of the Marine Corps, people won't talk to each other this way, they won't treat each other this way, and there'll be more empathy, and you'll be rewarded more quickly for your initiative or intelligence. You won't be held down by this silly little rank structure. And I just really believed that I would find much more contentment outside of the Marine Corps. And the other thing is, every day for 13 years, almost, every day, weekends sometimes and things like that, but you're getting up at 5:30, or I'm sorry, earlier than that. You're showing up at 5:30 to run 3 miles and do as many pull-ups as you can and a bunch of crunches and do PT. And then by 8, you're already showered up, shaved, and in your camouflage utilities and onto the schedule of the day. And it's just training all the time. And so I think what most people don't understand, because of lack of experience, is, 90% of the Marine Corps and military infantry style training or special operations or anything like that is training. It's mostly training. And in fact, most of the special operations guys I know are super jealous of my combat experience because they did a decade worth of really cool stuff, like really cool training that I didn't even get to go to and I didn't get to do, but they never got in a firefight. And so that's honestly the way it is for most people who have been in the combat arms MOSs, is they actually, most of them don't actually get to see a lot of combat. And even if you are lucky enough, I say that with,
I understand.
sarcasm, to go into combat, it's only after it's like years and years of gruesome, just daily training.
Hard training, yeah.
Yeah, and so, and then when you get back from an experience like that, guess what you do? You start training again.
Yeah.
You start training. Yeah, you go back to training. Yeah. So now you're the combat experienced senior ranking guy. So now you need to train all your lower guys to go do what you did. And so training never ever ends in the military. And honestly, I just got sick of it. I shot so many rounds, so many machine guns, so many pistols and rifles, so many times that it's just like it gets really old. And I didn't want to get up that early anymore. I didn't want to shave every day anymore.
Didn't want to cut the hair.
Yeah, I didn't want to cut I hated getting haircuts, man.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I'm a Second Amendment guy, and I hunt. We got opening of deer season here in about a week, and On the other side of the studio here is my safe with my deer rifle in it. I was actually thinking today I need to pull that thing out and sight it in. So it's cool to think of all the weapons and the weapon systems that you got to train on and use. But I could also understand where if you're using that all the time and doing that all the time ad nauseum, it can, the burnout effect is real.
Like a weapon specifically, it's a good way to look at it. So like a machine gun, one of the machine guns I use most frequently is called an M240 Bravo. So it's like the letter M 240 Bravo, and it's a 25.6 pounds. It's 48 inches long. It's a big gun, and it has, the ammo is really heavy too. It's 7 pounds per 100 rounds, and when you're going through 650 rounds per minute, you have to carry a lot of ammo. Yeah. But for example, if you just wanted to go and do some machine gun training, like some static tripod machine gun training at a local range, the amount of administrative and logistical coordination for that is just asinine to make that happen.
I bet.
And then the amount of safety precautions and all the, this is so much that goes into something as simple as just shooting a machine gun on a range. But then you come back from the range and you're going to spend hours cleaning the crap out of that machine gun because it just gets carbon and grease and debris all up in the inner workings of it. And so we after a couple of years, you're just like, I don't want to go to the range. If I shoot, I have to clean, and I'm serious.
And anyone who shoots knows that, because when I shoot any of my little, AR or whatever, you got to break it down and clean it afterwards. You got to get all that out of there. So it doesn't take hours, but it does take time.
Or like one more example is like tanks. If you talk to a tanker, they'll tell you for every 1 hour of operation of the tank actually doing its thing, they spend 8 hours of maintenance.
Oh man!
So imagine how fun that job is.
No thanks. It's a no for me, dog. So
me too.
For many of us, I would say the mass majority of us who will never and hopefully never experience a firefight. Mm-hmm. If you're okay with it, take me through what is in your mind, what you're thinking, what that feels like when you're in a real life combat firefight. That's interesting to me.
It feels like a movie. It really feels like a movie. Now, the positive part of all that training is, here's a quote that I used to love telling my young Marines, is when stuff hits the fan, people very rarely rise to the occasion, but instead they fall back to their training. So whatever you've done repetitiously over and over and over and over again, when you're in an emergency, you can do that quickly and easily. And it's not very common for you to just suddenly have some superhero, tactic or in strength and ability.
Sure.
Although that can happen sometimes. People do crazy cool stuff when they're in a pinch. But so the first thing that happens when you're in a situation like that is you immediately default to your training. So it's probably kind of a weird thing to hear for most people, but for myself and all the Marines that I knew, when you hear a gunshot or an explosion, we're like running towards that shit. We want to go get involved. It's like exciting for us. And honestly, it feels almost like third person, like you're in a movie to an extent, because you've seen these movies. I watched Black Hawk Down, Rules of Engagement, The Patriot, and all these things, and Full Metal Jacket and Platoon and all this. And so when these things start popping off and you're actually getting involved in it, it's kind of a rush. It's kind of quite thrilling at first. It's a ton of adrenaline pumps through your body, and you can't wait to get involved, and you can't wait to be like, oh, I actually did this thing that I've been training my whole life to finally do. You just kind of do what you've been trained to do, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
And it's not scary if you've been trained for it. It's actually quite thrilling until someone gets hurt.
Yeah. And
then once you realize that there are no main characters in this movie, and some of the nicest, most well-trained super Marines and even super Christian dudes that I knew will get smoked like that dudes that have kids and wives at home. Just these people are supposed to be the main character in their story. It seems they're so awesome, and they're toast. They're gone. They're out of the fight, and they're dead. And when you see that happening right around you, or you're having to carry, for example, a deceased sniper down from a rooftop that he was on top of because he's dead. Suddenly suddenly the movie is not the same. It goes from this sort of Marvel experience to like a Legends of the Fall experience. You're like, oh crap, what did I get myself into? And so it starts off exciting, but then it becomes quickly sombering, and then the jokes kind of cease, and people just become very, very serious, quiet, and just focused on the task at hand. But I think most people compartmentalize their pain until after the fight.
Do you do any type of outreach or assisting other combat veterans now who've similar experiences?
Just my friends, just my own friends. Like I was on a phone last night with a guy named Bradley Watson. He's a really well-known Marine Corps sniper who was also in that battle with me. Just so happened to be on the phone with him. But we have a lot. I think I have 400 or 500 friends that they know they can call me, and I call them, and we have these conversations all the time. But I've never in an official capacity, like held an office or position where I did that. As
I think your story, you definitely have all the right pieces and the potential to help your brothers, if you so choose. I know that's a lot. Yeah. I mean, I think there's probably something scary along with that too. For example, look what happened to the American sniper,
Chris Kyle. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, took a fellow combat vet to the range, and the guy had a moment and shot him. It could be a little scary, but I think folks who have lived what you've lived, they're not going to listen to someone like me. Going back to I don't have a point of reference because I didn't do it. But someone like you who does have a similar experience, maybe they're having a hardship. Maybe it's, I don't know, for example, struggling with alcoholism or the litany of other issues that could arise. Someone like you, I think, could be a great voice of help to those. I'm just putting this in your ear.
I appreciate that recommendation, and I really would like to be more involved with that kind of stuff. There's speaking of all this, there's a famous combat photographer named Ashley Gilbertson. It's a guy, and he was embedded with us when we were in that specific battle, but he also was embedded with a lot of units in a lot of different battles, and there's like a huge article piece on him. I think it's either in New York Times or one of these other major news outlets that kind of follows him in his journey of PTSD after coming back from the same battles. And he's just taking pictures. Yeah. Wow. So he's not pulling the trigger at all, but he's just taking pictures. And he's been very public about his decades-long struggle with depression and alcoholism and all this stuff, even though he has, these awards for being a world-renowned photographer, combat photographer, and he has books with all his pictures in it. And, you never know how people will react to the gruesome nature of war.
My first question to you is, there had to be a conversion with you, and I believe there had to be two conversions. The first was there had to be a point where you accepted your belief in Christ. And I don't know if that was before your military service, maybe during your military service, maybe after. And then you had to felt called, and you had to feel emboldened to become an evangelist, as you said you were, and teach. And then there had to be another conversion point to where you said, okay, I don't necessarily believe this anymore. And now I'm going to start voicing those beliefs this other direction. So if you could walk me through that, I find that very intriguing.
Sure. So, I was born and raised in the Christian home as well. So, my parents were super involved with all the different programs, and so was I. We started off as Southern Baptist, sort of Free Will Baptist, for the first 10, 12 years of my life. And then we moved to a Presbyterian or Reformed Calvinistic theology at a Presbyterian church in Palm Bay, Florida. And so through that period, I mean, I must have had many different like conversion experiences. Like I remember when I was 9 being convicted by an altar call at Perimeter Road Baptist Church in Valdosta, Georgia, and feeling the call of the Holy Spirit and all this stuff, and crying and going to the front and saying, I want to be saved and get baptized and stuff. And then again when I was 12 at a youth camp, a summer camp, they had we're out in this sort of mausoleum, and it was a beautiful area next to a river, and they were playing worship music, and the mood felt good, and I felt convicted, and they asked if anyone wanted to rededicate themselves to Christ, and of course I wanted to, and I was always very, very emotionally driven and attracted to this idea of sort of redemption, or if I really am sick, and if I really am evil or doing things wrong or whatever, in my deep down in my heart of hearts, just as a human being, I don't want to be that, right? I don't like that. So I would feel every chance I could, I would feel convicted to rededicate myself to this and take it very seriously. Now in high school, I really didn't get any. I mean, I didn't break the law. I didn't drink, smoke, do anything crazy. I just played basketball, went to church. I was very obsessed, pretty clean cut. I did ultimately. There's a long story there, but I ended up.
Hey, I have all the time in the world you want to talk, my man. So this is all on you.
Okay, well, I will say that when in my senior year of playing basketball. For this Christian school, I started secretly dating the headmaster's daughter because she had asked him if we could date, and he told her no. And so we waited 6 months, and then she asked him again, I still like Justin, can we date? He told her no. So we decided we were just going to start sneaking around. And so we started sneaking out in the middle of the night to go meet up and literally just talk and just have a boyfriend-girlfriend relationship, sure. Which ultimately led into us sleeping together and things like that. Well, eventually, long story short, we got caught, and it was about. And by the way, I was obsessed with basketball. Obsessed. I was pretty good at it too.
How tall are you?
6'3".
Oh wow, man! Yeah. I'm 9.5 on a good day. You can tower over me.
Yeah, man. I was actually ranked in Florida for 3-point shooting. I was a really good shooter and dribbler and stuff.
That's awesome.
So I was my entire life goal was just to play basketball in college. That was like all I wanted to do. So when I said that 9/11 thing happened, that happened on the heels of me and my ex-wife now getting caught. And what this church did, is a massive church. I want to say they had somewhere close to 3,000 members. There was probably a regular attendance on Sundays of 800 to 1,000, something like that. They not only did they kick me off of the basketball team after only playing 2 games my senior year, but they also sent a letter to every member of the church and school, letting them know what I did. And
to 3,000 people.
Yeah, every single person at the time, I felt like everyone in my whole town knew what I did. It was so
what is
traumatizing.
The reasoning behind that? What's the point?
I have no freaking clue. I have no freaking clue. I was like completely like they were.
Were you a minor at the time?
Yeah, I was 17. Yeah, and she was 17. We're both.
How was that? That has to be treading illegal.
Yeah, I know. At the time, we didn't know better, and we, as always submitted to the church and to church discipline. And right. My parents didn't like the way the church handled it, and they ultimately left the church after a while. But they let it happen. They let me. I mean, to me, this is clear religious abuse, and can easily lead into religious trauma syndrome and things like that. I was publicly humiliated in front of everyone that I knew. Every single person I knew, pretty much. So I basically put myself on house arrest until I could go to boot camp. And they actually put her on house arrest until I went to boot camp. So one of the reasons, like 9/11 gave me the okay, let's do this. We need to do this now. I want to get there out here as soon as I can. But I was already looking for a way to just get the hell out of town anyways, because I felt completely ostracized by my entire community. But that's another whole story. But from there, I went into the Marine Corps, and her and I ended up actually getting married when I was 19 and she was 18. We had 3 kids together. My son turns 18 this year, actually, my oldest.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
We must be about the same age. What year were you born?
83.
I was born 82.
There you go.
Yeah, we are the same age, and I can't believe you have almost an 18-year-old. I've got a 9-year-old, and I can't imagine having one getting ready to head out to,
I know,
to
it's crazy.
the military or college. That's crazy. But anyways, sorry to cut you off.
No, you're good. So in my 20s, my ex-wife was the daughter of a pastor. She was very interested in making sure that we keep going to church and keep being involved and keep volunteering and keep tithing. Most importantly, keep tithing. And so all through my 20s, we did that, and I continued to be a part of it. Now, our marriage wasn't perfect, and we both made mistakes, but every time that happened, whenever there was a serious issue, we ran straight back to the church for support, counseling. We had a legal separation period where I was being counseled by my pastor and one of the elders, and she was being counseled by a different elder. And we did a lot of work through the church to try and salvage our marriage before eventually it just became unsalvageable. But to be honest, in my 20s, I wasn't really that interested anymore in getting up and going to Sunday morning church and sitting in a stuffy room and listening to the same old sermons over and over again, because I had actually come to understand Reformed theology enough to where I was just bored, literally bored with it. There was every sermon was like, dude, you taught this 6 months ago. I remember, what are we doing? And yeah. I didn't really
you hear the same
with it.
Stories so many times ad nauseum. It just becomes,
And in Presbyterian circles, especially Reformed and Calvinist type circles, they're very focused on theology. So we studied systematic theology, and we had a bunch of guys who had recently graduated seminary. We're always doing these deep think groups where we would dig into the Greek and get really into stuff. And I'm glad, because I liked that, and I absorbed it all like a sponge as best as I could. But ultimately, I got bored with the whole thing because it ended up becoming more of a knowledge contest, and the attitudes of the people leading the church was just kind of very, it wasn't, the focus wasn't on community and care and compassion. The focus was on who's the smartest theologian in the room, Yeah. And these people worshipped R.C. Sproul, and they worshipped John MacArthur, and they worshipped John Piper, and I used to read all those books, ad nauseum. Mm-hmm. So once my ex-wife and I divorced, I took a couple of years off from church. For the first time in my life, I was at the point where I was like, look, I don't really want to be doing this anymore. I don't really like going. It's boring. I already know what they're going to say, and I can read myself at home, So I just stopped going, and I still took my faith pretty seriously and still continued to try and do what was right as far as I understood it. And I wasn't off trying to do drugs or do crazy stuff.
Sure.
It still meant a lot to me. And the last couple of years in the Marine Corps, I just kind of fell out of love with the whole situation.
The question I wanted to ask you, do you feel your combat experience, what you saw in combat, led to that falling out, as you called, falling out with the situation? How can there be a God if all of this death and destruction and pain is happening around me? Yeah.
Right. Honestly, it's funny you asked that. I would be more likely to make that point now than I would have back then.
Okay.
I feel and I was asked those kind of questions a lot, even by my own dad and stuff. They're like, how did combat change you, philosophically and stuff, And at the time, and even thinking back on it, I failed to see where it really, and maybe I'm sure it did, of course, impact me and change me in many ways.
Oh,
but
it would have to, yeah.
I can't with my front brain see and acknowledge a literal, like, cognitive connection, because I never thought, why, God, why did you take these people from? I never had that moment.
So you don't think that combat experience may have pushed you to where you are now? Is kind of where I'm getting, the point I'm getting.
It probably has helped in that I know that this is not a freaking joke, and
Gotcha.
a lot of people think it is, and that's one of the lyrics in my song. I'm also write rap too.
I play guitar, and
Hey.
I DJ and I play guitar. That's the two things I do.
That's cool, man.
Most people know me as a DJ because I've DJed in front of thousands of people. I've played guitar in front of like 100.
That's cool, man. I've always been interested in DJ stuff. I've never got into it. I always thought it was so cool, though.
Well, we could talk about that after we get off the religion topic if you want, man. I'd love to. I'm a nerd when it comes to that stuff. But anyways,
man.
You were talking about through your military experience, you fell out of love with the situation, but then you fell back in love with the situation. So how did you fall out of love and then fall back into love with it?
So I think I went through a period where I didn't see a tangible physical connection between the spiritual world and real life. And I didn't say it that way, and I wouldn't have probably even vocalized it that way. I probably would have just said something like, it's just boring. I don't want to go anymore. It's just so boring. Like, what are they going to say? Like, but I looking back, I think that it was a disconnect between tangible reality and positive outcome and just spirituality in general. And so the reason I say that is because that's what actually led me back in to it. So when I was, I got out of the Marine Corps, I was working on my my MBA, and I was getting really deep into a lot of different political stuff. I used to be a really hardcore political activist, so I had a Twitter account back in 2016 where I was campaigning for Trump and InfoWars, and I used to have Paul Joseph Watson like retweeting my tweets, and Trump's legal aid, Michael Cohen, and I talked on the phone a couple times. He was helping me with a homeless project I was working on at the time. So I became very politically active and started falling down the rabbit hole of researching into, I guess you would say conspiratorial topics and looking at, just all kinds of stuff, right? And I don't know if there's a conspiracy theory I haven't heard. I'd be surprised if there was. I'm sure there is, but I mean, God, I went down every rabbit hole, but and I believed most of it for a long time. But the point I'm making is I started to see what I thought looked like a tangible connection between sort of like the demonic and the satanic and the real world. All these blood drinking Satanists are running the government, and the end times, so to speak,
is
idea,
here or upon us.
End times ideas, eschatology, and all that started to kind of. I started to make my way into my research again, and I started to experience sleep paralysis, and that's really one of the big things. There was two things that kind of happened to help push me back into becoming more obsessed with spirituality than I had ever been in my life. And one was sleep paralysis, and the other was an argument I got into with my wife. I say sleep paralysis because I would wake up in the middle of the night. It happened to me like 2 or 3 times when I was a couple of years ago. I wake up in the middle of the night and I couldn't move my body. All you can do is breathe and look straight. You can't. Your body's incapable of moving when you have sleep paralysis. And so you wake up and you're kind of like trapped inside your own body. That's how it feels.
Wow.
And you can't breathe. You feel like you just can't breathe. Like you're trying as hard as you can to just, I'm always like trying to just move my fingers, like just trying to move my fingers even a little bit, or try and like say something to my wife who's sleeping next to me, and I can't move. I'm just stuck.
Yeah.
And the first couple times that happens to you, you're so scared. You're not sure what's happening, if you're in a dream, if you're dying or whatever. So I started to research sleep paralysis. And since I was already sort of opening myself up again to the ideas of, hyper spiritual ideas of like demonic stuff, demonic activity and all this stuff, I when the physiological / scientific answer didn't satisfy me for what was happening to me, I looked at the spiritual implications of it. And of course, there's a ton of, there's from, all types of mystical, either pagan, Christian, all types of different sources and stories and ideas about what sleep paralysis is. But I found all these pictures of a big demon sitting on someone's chest, basically, and staring them in the eye. And, I thought to myself, well, maybe there's something spiritual happening here, more than physiological. And it gave me a lot of anxiety because I knew that I had kind of like taken spirituality for granted for a couple of years. And then on top of that, around the same period of my life, my wife and I were both, very, very right wing and very conservative. But we got in an argument one time, and I don't even remember what it was about. It was something small, and she was giving me the silent treatment, which is something she doesn't do anymore. We both had to work through like bad habits. She doesn't do that anymore. But she was giving me the silent treatment, and I stood in our room and looked at her while she's laying in bed, and I was just like, do you care about my feelings at all, like whatsoever? Are you going to talk to me so we can work this out? And she wouldn't say anything. And I was just like, well, do you give a crap about the biblical authority? Do you care at all that, you're supposed to like submit to me? And like, I wasn't like trying to get her to do anything stupid. I just want her to talk to me, just to have a conversation. Yeah. And she fired back and she goes, when you start becoming a spiritual leader of this household, maybe I'll consider that. And so I was like, it like really cut me.
Biblically and scripturally, she kind of had a point there.
Mm-hmm. So I'm the kind of person who will admit when I'm wrong. That's why I'm where I am today, I think. I remember walking out of the room and thinking about that for like a long time and being like, shit, it's time for me to start taking this more seriously. Like I'm being hypocritical. I realized I was being hypocritical. So I apologized to her and I dedicated myself to taking this more seriously. How can I expect to have a Christian household or a godly household if I'm not teaching them the Bible and reading it with them and applying it myself,
Sure.
So that started my journey. Originally, I started some YouTube channel called the Unchurch, where I was going to I wanted to create like an online church that was just different from regular church, not like to go against Christianity, but just to have a different format for worshiping and Bible studies. Ultimately, the Unchurch would become Christian Truthers, which was a YouTube channel I started in 2017. And Christian Truthers ended up becoming really big. That grew into 50,000 subscribers, and I had 800 Bible study. Like we had this group of people who it's hard to explain, but I had 800 members, and they were broken down into groups of 10 with a leader of each group, and they were all interacting with each other on Marco Polo, which I don't know if you're familiar with that app or not. Mm-hmm. But it's like a video. Yeah. It's like a video texting app. It's like it's like TikTok without sharing. It's only just for the people you're directly connected with, And I can send a video message to you, and you send one back, and that's it, Sure. But you could also create groups where when you send a message to the group, everyone in the group sees it, and they can all reply to each other. So we had 800 members in there, and I had like 300 Patreons, and it just really grew from 2017 to about 2020. It just like really, really, really grew. It was doing really good. And we had weekly live streams and 3 Bible studies per week for men, women, and children, depending on which one you wanted to go to. And I was hosting those, and I had volunteers. I had 2 full-time volunteers helping me administratively handle all these emails and questions and all this crap I was dealing with. But when I got back into taking it seriously, I realized pretty quickly that there were some very simple things about faith that I had never been told. I wanted to start simple. I wanted to be like, what is faith? What is it? What is this according to the Bible, according to the Greek, according to the the best context that I can possibly come up with. I didn't want to ever copy a commentary ever in my life. So I decided I would write my own. I would listen to as many scholars as I can. I'd look at the language and the linguistics and the language scholars and what they say about it. And I would look at the context and say, I think faith is a verb, actually, and people are missing that. And so I made a little video called Faith is a Verb and explained how using the biblical text, if you apply it through the lens of like James chapter 2 and Hebrews and things like that, you come to this quick conclusion that, faith is non-existent if you're not acting on it. Like it just doesn't exist unless it's something you do. Like having faith is the Bible's, in my opinion at the time, the Bible's context was really more about acting out of faith and less about just holding on to some hidden belief in your mind that has no impact on your life whatsoever. So I made this documentary video called Faith is a Verb, and it blew up. So then I started studying grace. What does grace really mean? And long story short, quick one-sentence synopsis. That study came to the conclusion that grace is the power of the Holy Spirit given to you to enable you to essentially go and sin less. And that in the context that I was looking at and everything, I was like, I think people think faith is just belief, and they think grace is just I can get away with anything. And it's not. I was like, faith is something you do, and grace is something we receive so that we can do more and so that we can help more. And so it just kept snowballing, and I ended up doing a whole Bible study series called the Fruit of the Spirit series, where I went through every single fruit of the Spirit, breaking it down, and it just grew and grew and grew until I had a whole big following of people wanting to get my opinion on all kinds of stuff. And eventually I became Messianic. I was Hebrew roots, Torah observant, Messianic Jewish. That's where I was for the last 3 years before I deconverted.
That's a kind of a travel there to go from Southern Baptist and fried chicken to Messianic Jewish. That's not to derail your train of thought, but what took you from Southern Baptist to Messianic Jewish? That's kind of a difference there. Very different.
Yeah. Well, reading the Bible, I guess, and studying it for myself just convicted me differently.
Sure.
So I understand like the Southern Baptist, Free Will Baptist doctrines when they tell me, no, you're getting it wrong because you have to rightly divide according to, Timothy, whatever. I'm just like, I know I could teach you that if you want, I know what Darby dispensationalists teach. I know what you're going to say. Like, I get it. Like, I was there and I really did pay attention, and I really still look at the other perspectives from other denominations and I take them seriously. And when I was in Presbyterianism, same thing. I understand Calvinism very, very, very well. And so when I get Calvinists today come to me and say, no, you're missing the whole point. Paul says that we're predestined and all this stuff. I'm like, I know, bro. I know. But I'm telling you that I just don't think that's correct anymore. And so the way I ended up Torah observant was through, there's a couple of different ways. One of the big things was I started looking at the teachings of Paul through a new lens. And this lens was actually gifted to me by a ministry called 119 Ministries, which is on YouTube. They're very big.
Mm-hmm. I think I've heard of them, yeah.
They teach this, they have this series called the Pauline Paradox. And it's like, I think it's like literally like 12 hours long. It's like a bunch of different videos. And I went through and I studied out this Pauline Paradox series, and the perspective from their viewpoint is that Paul was never teaching against the Torah. He was never teaching that anyone should stop keeping the Torah. And people are taking his statements out of context when they say, it's by grace you are saved and not of works, lest any man should boast and all this stuff. They found a way to say, well, he is saying that, but in the context of, well, you still need to keep the law because, and here's the 1,000 reasons why. Jesus said in in Matthew 5. I didn't come to get rid of the law. I came to fulfill it. Anyone who teaches against the law will be the least in the kingdom of heaven, and anyone who teaches in support of it will be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. It says that right there in Matthew. So when I started to take on this new lens of study, I was like, oh, okay, so Jesus kept the Torah completely. The first early Christians kept the Torah, the Ebionite Jews and the Nazarite, Nazarim or Nazarenes.
If you need to pick that up, we can edit.
No, it's fine. I came to this conclusion that there was this derailing that occurred when Rome got involved with Christianity. And originally it was supposed to maintain its Jewish roots, Hebrew roots rather. And if we're going to be like Jesus, then we should also keep the Torah because he did. And
Sure.
his 12 disciples did. And we can see in different parts of Acts that they were still keeping the Torah. Stephen was still eating clean. There's just a lot of ways you can look at it, Mm-hmm. So of course now I'm not there anymore, but I'm just trying to explain the perspective.
Oh no, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So for about 3 years we kept as much of the Torah as we possibly could. So I didn't eat any pork or shellfish. We only worshipped on Saturdays because that's the seventh day of the week. We kept all the Jewish feasts, holidays, and we didn't keep any of the pagan Christian Easter holidays, whatever, as we used to call them.
Mm-hmm. No Christmas or anything like that?
No Christmas, Easter, Halloween, nothing like that.
Mm-hmm.
So we just did the 7 biblical feasts through the year. And we kind of lived in our own little world. It's Messianic Jew is the reason I use that phrase Messianic Jew because it's the closest cousin to what we were doing and what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
But Messianic Judaism is probably a little bit more closely, in my opinion, Messianic Judaism is a little bit more mainstream Christian than people realize. We were a little bit more hardcore than that. A lot of Messianic Jews don't really take the Torah very seriously, actually. They don't.
If we're being completely honest, I don't know a whole lot about Messianic Judaism.
It's just, they believe that Jesus Christ was real, but his name was Yeshua, not Jesus, Or if you're in my little subsection, we believe his name was Yahusha. And
explain that to me.
Yahusha?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so
I find all this very interesting. I'm sorry to kind of cut you.
No, it's fine. I love talking about it. So, we, every major scholar knows that Jesus wasn't actually called Jesus in the first century because the letter J wasn't even used, and the earliest writings we have with his name is actually technically in Greek, not Hebrew, and it's Iesus, Ioesus. And when the Iesus was transliterated into English, it became Jesus. They dropped the I and put a J there. But before that, it was the early Christian church's belief that, and today a lot of scholars will still say that Jesus' name actually was Joshua. Like Jesus and Joshua are spelled the same in the earliest Hebrew writings that they have, and for whatever reason, instead of translating his real name, which is Yahusha, into Joshua, which is what we did with Joshua, we took it and made it into Yahusha. In the modern Hebrew, we somehow, for whatever reason, changed it to a Greek transliteration instead. And of course, there's all these parallels between Joshua and Jesus. Like I made a whole Joshua prophecy video about that one time. So we just believed that his name was being intentionally obscured from people, so that they wouldn't be worshiping the right person or some crazy stuff. It's called the Sacred Name Movement. But the more I dug into that, ultimately, I can now say with some pretty good confidence that there's really no real proof in any old Hebrew that anyone ever called him Yahusha. But I think most scholars will tell you that he was probably called Yeshua when in the first century, but it's yeah.
Well, you have 2,000 years of what's the worst thing to any type of literature or historical record keeping? Humans. So, you have 2,000 years of humans, and over the course of 2,000 years, you have different time periods, whether it be after Christ was on this earth, into the Middle Ages, and then even into our what we think of as current time. Through those different parts of our past, there were very powerful men that had different agendas, and whatever their agenda was at that time, we can see through history where things in history and record-keeping books were skewed for that king or that empire to help their cause for that time, the 10th century or whatever. So I think there's something to be said with just human meddling for 2,000 years. I mean, look at the King James version of the Bible. Do I believe in the King James version of the Bible? 100%. But do I also believe that there are how many books that were left out?
There's 14. They're missing now, yeah.
Enoch, Book of Mary,
Jubilees, Jasher, Tobit, lots.
So,
Ecclesiasticus.
And there's a deep dive, and I'm sure you're far more knowledgeable of this than I am, of why did King James and his circle of people decide that those weren't going to make the cut? Those didn't get left in. So my point is humans over the years we are great at screwing things up, right? So I have to believe as a Christian that, and I guess it goes back to faith, and you say faith is a verb, and I agree with you, but also I have to, as a Christian, have faith that the person who I'm calling my Savior, his name is Jesus. Now, do I feel like, if we're being fair, do I feel like when I hit the pearly gates, when this life is over, and I'm like, oh, can I meet Jesus? And they say, well, his real name was Yeshua, or however you said it. I'm like, okay, cool. Do I feel like that's going to be like the big ding against me in my life? No. You know what I mean?
Obviously not. That's irrational.
So that's my point. Yeah, that's my point. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you on that completely. I don't think the Sacred Name movement is, well, and they do it by taking the verses in the Old Testament specifically where God emphasizes the importance of his name. And they take that and say, look, if you're saying the wrong name, then you're not getting spiritual protection or whatever. But, there was no additional power for us in calling him by any other name. It didn't make any difference. If we're going to assume that that God wants us to believe in his son, I don't think a misspelling of his son's name or mispronouncing of it would be that critical personally.
That detrimental, correct.
Yeah.
So what took you from this big following you amassed on YouTube, and then you went into the Judaism side, and you had these people following you on your YouTube, and these groups that you were leading, to where you are today?
Well, it started with Paul, and then it went from there. But I started studying this perspective that, and this is kind of, I have to be clear that like when talking about this perspective now, I have to kind of rewind and go, okay, if you assume that the Bible is 100% true, especially the New Testament, then I realized that through studying, Paul contradicts the other books. So Paul is at least the author of 7 of the New Testament, books, and there's only 27 of them.
27.
And and some people believe that he's responsible for up to 13 of them, but regardless, we know which ones they are. It's the Eans and the Romans and the Corinthians and the Ephesians and Galatians and all that. So once I started to really dig into Paul and the history of his writings and the problems that I was seeing with it, in my opinion, and I have, by the way, if people are interested, I have 2 videos on my YouTube channel called 50 Reasons to Never Quote Paul Again. And that,
that's pretty direct.
Yes. So that video is made from the perspective of, when I made that when I was still, hardcore Christian and definitely like in the faith still. Yeah. So
to me, it sounded like you made that after, but you made that when you were still practicing.
Yeah, because Paul, in my mind, wasn't necessary for salvation.
Sure.
And also, I didn't understand. I didn't understand the chronological order of things back then either. I thought, Jesus came, and then all these people who were around him maybe and saw him and stuff wrote about him, and then 30 years later, Paul comes on and he gets this vision, from on his way to Damascus, and Paul takes this whole Christianity thing a totally different direction than the other disciples were. The other disciples were in Jerusalem. They had already said that Peter was the apostle to the Gentiles. Peter had a vision telling him that he's an apostle to the Gentiles. And then here comes Paul out of the blue with this so-called vision that matches the vision of, well, not doesn't match, but it's similar to the vision of Joseph Smith and Muhammad. And I'm like, wait a second, maybe this dude's making all this crap up. So I started realizing that, because I didn't understand the chronology of how the gospel was actually compiled, I thought that, the disciples did their thing first, and then Paul came along and kind of screwed it up. And it's really interesting, actually, if you're interested in it. But
sure.
There's a lot of interesting clues. He says he's from the tribe of Benjamin, and the sign of Benjamin is a wolf. And Jesus' disciples and Jesus were warning about a wolf in sheep's clothing, not to just be dissuaded by a wolf in sheep's clothing. And then Paul, some of the things he says are in direct opposition to things James says. And it's actually, if you read Galatians and James side by side, it looks like they're arguing with each other. So there's some really cool studies on that too. So I came to this conclusion, and this is a very short version of it, but I studied this for a couple of months. But I came to this conclusion that Paul is a false apostle who Christianity, the mainstream version of Christianity that we know today, was built off of Paul's back, and that the actual belief of the original 12 was lost because they were all keeping Torah and stuff. But then here comes Paul saying, oh, don't need to circumcise your kids. It doesn't matter if you eat food sacrificed to idols. It doesn't matter what day of the week you worship on. Paul's saying these things, and that completely contradicts the Torah, So according to Deuteronomy 13 and 18, if a prophet comes telling you to break the Torah, then he's a false prophet and you should kick him out. And you have several engagements where Paul goes to see the other 12 in Jerusalem, and he always causes a ruckus and ends up leaving the other 12. They always send him away from the other 12. And it's really because, well, it even says the first time Paul interacts with the other 12 disciples, they didn't believe he was a disciple. And then Barnabas came and convinced the other 12, no, he's okay, he's good. I've been hanging out with him and stuff. But to me, even that's a red flag, because it's these 12 were, their hands, Jesus' hands were put on them, and the fire of tongues came down. Well, depending on which story you look at, there's two different.
Yep. Sure.
Yeah. These guys are supposed to have all these powers. Their shadow can heal someone or whatever, and they didn't think that Paul was a genuine apostle when they first met him, until they were convinced to accept him and trust him. But even then, they were well, you go that way and we'll stay here. And Paul went off to the Gentiles, so-called, to preach his gospel to the Gentiles or whatever. So I saw that for a time. I saw that as this big bait and switch thing that happened. And I thought that that's what led into this sort of lawless Christianity that we see in the mainstream today, where, what's that lyric from Mercy Me? Every day is a losing battle. Faith says that it doesn't matter because he's already won the war. And it's whoa, pause. You're telling people that it's okay to do evil shit every day because Jesus died for you. And that's not right. That's not good, And that comes from, those ideas come from Pauline type writings, and James was the opposite. James was if, faith without works is dead. If you have no faith, if you don't have works, you don't have faith. It's a totally different message. So that's where I kind of landed for a time, and I did my teachings on Paul, and I started realizing that everything Paul was saying was constantly contradicting the Torah, making him a false prophet, yada, yada. So I got rid of Paul and decided I was just going to focus on the other biblical texts from the New Testament, like the Gospels and John and things like that. But since I was already on I was already in a place where I had made this decision to test Paul. I had thousands of comments saying, well, the next thing you're going to do is throw out Jesus, because that's what happens. I had a really big YouTuber. His name was Rob Skiba. He's dead now. He was really massive in like the Christian conspiracy world for a long time. He was also a friend of mine, and he actually came out publicly against me, condemning me for my Paul teachings and stuff. And one of the biggest things I kept being told was, look, if you throw out Paul, the next thing you're going to do is you're going to throw out the rest of the New Testament, and then you're going to throw out the whole Bible. So you need to just stop right where you're at and just stop doing that. Just stop testing it and pushing it so far. And my response was always, look, I am not going to make decisions based on the implications. I'm not going to say that, either this is true because of the outcome will be good for me, or this is true because the outcome will be bad for me, so therefore I'm going to go with the good outcome. I'm like, I don't care about that. You guys can hate me, kill me, crucify me. I want to know the truth. And so if the outcome is that I lose my entire faith, so be it, because I want to know. And so I started off on a journey to defend the Messiah. I was like going to prove to all of them. I'm like, look, you can easily defend the Messiah without Paul's bull crap. That's where I was at. And so I wrote an article series called The Messiah Complex, and it was like a 7-part series where I was proving that Jesus, the main intent of the article series was to prove that you could support Jesus using Old Testament literature, because the Jewish people especially, I didn't understand as much about Jewish belief as I do now, but they reject Jesus, and they were saying that he doesn't fit within the context of the Jewish scriptures, but of course Christians say that he does. Oh, what are you talking about? There's Isaiah 53, and what about Psalm 27, and all this stuff. So I'm like, yeah, exactly, yeah. So I'm like, yeah, I'm going to prove these Jews wrong. I'm going to do a really deep dive on this, and I'm going to show them that Jesus is all over the New Testament. And I was pretty successful at that, actually. Like, by the time I got to my last article, I had written this all types of different perspectives, showing like, look, this sounds like Jesus, this looks like Jesus. There's room for Jesus here. In this law and in this world. And then I think I hit a brick wall when I met a guy named Tovia Singer. You ever heard of Tovia Singer?
Sounds very familiar.
He's a very famous Jewish apologist, and he has a bunch of books and videos on YouTube and everywhere where he's trying to. His ministry is called Judaism for Jews, and he's mocking Jews for Jesus, right? Okay. So his ministry is Jews for Judaism, and his intent is to try and educate Christians who are trying to educate Jews. So he's like, you guys are spending millions of dollars. You're sending all these trips of Christians over here. You're constantly like attacking our people and trying to convert them to believe in Jesus. And I think that if you guys knew what we knew, you would stop believing in Jesus. So he started his ministry. And I was told, don't ever listen to Tovia Singer. Don't ever listen to him. He'll wreck your faith. And when I was in that place in that time, I was like, well, I can't honestly write a honest rebuttal of what Jews believe if I don't know what they believe. So yeah, I'm like, no, I'm like,
you've got to be informed.
Yeah, I'm like, bring it on, Tovia, let's do it. So I I spent days and days listening to a bunch of videos and taking notes and typing up, what I thought were going to be good responses and stuff. And ultimately, I realized that there's some really big problems when with the current, at least with the modern Christian understanding of what Jesus's role was and how that fits into the context of God's bigger plan and everything. It doesn't fit, in my opinion. It doesn't fit with what the Old Testament prescribes. And here's an example. Like I told you earlier, Deuteronomy 13 and 18 tell you that you can't, if a prophet teaches against the Torah, etc., then he's a false prophet. And they're like, oh well, Christians will say, well, Jesus fulfilled the Torah. He walked in it perfectly. He's a perfect, spotless lamb sacrifice and all this stuff. And he had to do that so that he could be the propitiation for our sins and all this. And, when I started reading Matthew 5 with the deeper understanding of the Torah, I started realizing that he's clearly teaching against the Torah. Like Jesus himself is teaching against the Torah. For example, the Torah says that you can, if a man finds something unclean in his wife, that he can write her a certificate of divorce, and she can actually go and get remarried. Jesus teaches in Matthew 5 that there's no excuse for divorce except for sexual immorality, and then anyone who marries a divorced woman also commits adultery. So this is an escalation. Like, these are rules being added on top of what was already expected in the Torah. There's, in the Torah, he openly says that you have heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And he's quoting Leviticus when he says that. And he goes, but I say, basically, I don't remember the exact statement, but if someone harms you, then turn the other cheek. Or if someone asks you for something, then give them even more than they asked for, and things like that.
I know those teachings, yeah.
Yeah, so it's essentially...
I think it's turn the other cheek once, twice, and then the third time, if I remember correctly, is when you can have a way of recourse against whatever it may be. So you're supposed to turn the other cheek twice, and then the third time is when you can have some kind of, defense of yourself, for lack of a better description. Yeah, so
when I realized that just in Matthew 5 alone, he teaches against the Torah when it comes to oaths, when it comes to adultery, when it comes to justice, and all of that. And then I also realized that the Old Testament says specifically that God hates human sacrifice and he thinks it's an abomination. And then I was like, I was all messed up after that. I'm like, wait a second. What about all these prophecies that I just got done reading and, I was sure are about him? And if you ask the Jewish scholars about those things, and if you listen to their perspective, they'll show you that they're not about Jesus. Like, for example, Isaiah, I can't remember, I think it's Isaiah 53. There's like this vague reference to Emmanuel and things like I can't remember, a broken reed he will not break, and all this stuff. And people are like, oh, look, it's talking about the Son of God when he comes in the future. But what most Christians don't realize is a few chapters later, a son is born to a king named Emmanuel, and that was the fulfillment of Isaiah's prophecy right there. Like, so there's this Christian expectation that prophecies will like double. Like say, if I was Isaiah living in the Bronze Age, I could make a prophecy, and then that would come true within a couple of weeks. But it will also come true on some grander scale, 2,500 years from now, and we're all going to see what he really meant by this. Like, the first thing was just a shadow of what's to come, and all this. That is completely not like that. That type of thinking is completely Christian only thinking. That doesn't exist.
One thing I've always felt really intriguing is the drawing the lines between the Antichrist and Nero. I think it was Nero at that time.
Yeah.
There's a lot of similarities from the writings in the Bible in reference to Nero. So that I've always found that to be wildly intriguing.
It is. Actually, I spent some time as a partial preterist, which is, preterists are those who believe that the end times already came in the first century, and that Jesus did return for his disciples as they were expecting him to, and that there was a rapture and all this stuff. And some preterists actually believe that happened right as Jerusalem was falling or something like that. So
Gotcha.
I kind of dabbled in that for a while, because you're right. Like, the Revelation and talking about sort of this mark of the beast, 666 stuff, it all points to what was happening in Jerusalem
at that time.
At that time, yeah.
So what made you? I have a couple of quick questions, and I won't keep you too much longer.
Sure.
What made you decide to start your TikTok, and how did it grow so quickly? That's the first question, and the second question is what. Those people who followed you on that YouTube that grew so wildly, do you still have relationship with these people? Are they still friend? Do they feel hurt, betrayed that you left? I know there's a lot to unpack there, but those, as you were telling your story, those were the questions that kind of came to mind.
Yeah, sure. So first with the TikTok thing, I just, I have a lot of content because I've been talking about this, and I mean, the way Eminem is obsessed with writing rhymes, I was obsessed with understanding as much as I possibly can about this stuff. And
spirituality, yeah.
Yes, my wife, like, I mean, she's to this day, she's like, dude, she comes in and she's like, take breaks, man. Like, stop. Go smoke a joint, chill out, you know, like, we have legal marijuana here, so.
No judgment from me, my brother.
But, so.
Side note, I think that's my biggest fight with Christianity as a proclaimed Christian is growing up in a church and in an environment was so charismatic, and the preachers at the pulpit screaming and yelling and spits flying and sweats going and everything, and it was a belief that, Lord, save me, you're saved. Right. Shit. Okay, now you're going to hell because you cussed. Lord, save me, you're saved. Take a drink of a beer, now you're going to hell.
Lord, that's some Southern Baptist stuff there.
I mean, just very. So when people say, "Oh, I smoke," or I'll whatever. Hey, I feel like if you're in my kind of same belief circle, if you have your faith in Christ and you're saved, that's all you need. I mean, if anyone's going to judge you, it's him, and it ain't me. People talk about politics and stuff as well. I always tell folks my religious and political views can be made in one statement. I want to see my gay friends get married, smoking weed while shooting their machine guns. That should tell you everything you need to know about me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, man.
So
we'll get along just fine. Yeah. Well, it's just simple freedom. Like, right? Like, we can't be hypocritical about freedom, right? Like, if we want it, then we got to give it to everyone. And I really appreciate that about you. So that's cool. But
now you were talking about your TikTok, and it took off with your content.
I already had a ton of content already. If you ask me a question about pretty much freaking anything, if I've already thought about it or wrote about it or made a video about it, I can recall it like right here. So like,
that's amazing.
I'm very, very lucky. I have a good memory. So when I started TikTok, I just started sharing some basic stuff, like, some problems I found. Like one of them was like I've made some really strong connections between the writings of Paul and Plato, for example. And I have an article on my website, bulletholesinthebible.com, called Paul or Plato. And I show that Paul, like, word for word, snips exact statements from Plato and Socrates and Aristotle, who came 400 years before him, to develop his own doctrine. And so I started showing that kind of stuff, just like tangible evidence that there's a little bit of mimicry in the New Testament, and people just really ate it up. And then I started getting hit with a lot of questions, and I just started answering those questions because I've already thought through a lot of the stuff, and people really connected with it. I was shocked, bro. I mean, the first week I hit 10,000 followers in 7 days. Oh, wow. And now we're at, I think 24 days, and I'm at 29.6 or something. So I'm just as shocked as you are, because I worked a really long time on YouTube to get to 50,000 followers. I mean, it took me three or 4 years, and it was grueling, grinding work to get there. And then I get on TikTok, and it's just like boom, boom, boom. It's like the world's just handed to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm like, what the heck?
I've got to restructure mine. If you look at mine's a lot of DJ and music related stuff. But what's really taken off for me is my performance stuff and the podcast. So I'm thinking about kind of restructuring mine to be more like when I'm out gigging, whether it be playing music or DJing, or and then podcast episodes like this. But the other
podcast is pretty big.
Yeah, well, I have a radio past. People know me from being on air. People know me I've made a name for myself in kind of the DJ community. And when I got a little bit of a following on Facebook and Instagram. So I got the blue check on Facebook. So anyways, when I put that out there, people were like, oh, he's got a podcast now. And it just started, like you do with content, you post content and it continues to kind of snowball. So I've gotten very fortunate. But so, and I won't keep you too much longer. When you were talking about building this group, you had this, if you want to call it a following from your YouTube channel, and you had this group, you mentioned the app you guys were texting on and going back and forth. I mean, I'm sure there were some relationships there that were had grown.
Oh yeah.
So what happened when you left? And were there a lot of people hurt? Did they follow you? What happened there?
There was a really vast range of responses from people. The predominant response, if I had to just guess, and of course this is a real true guess, I have no idea, but if the predominant response, I'd say 90% of people immediately hated me.
Oh, sure. They feel betrayed. They feel hurt.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. I lost 10,000 subscribers on YouTube within like 6 months. Every time I posted any video, I'd lose subscribers. It's still kind of like that, actually. I only started recently gaining subscribers on YouTube again because they're coming over from TikTok. But so I got bombarded with. I mean, I have friends that I thought were really close with me that won't talk to me anymore. They think I'm the Antichrist. Like literally, they think I'm the Antichrist.
Can I just say I told several close friends that I was going to have you on, and I was kind of picking their brain, like what are some things I should ask or whatever. And I blatantly had two people, and possibly a third, they were on the fence, try to talk me out of this interview. They were like, don't give him a platform to speak this. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't disagree with that more. Just from a sheer conversational point, if we're going to have a conversation with one another about spirituality and about Christianity, believer or non-believer, or someone just in the middle trying to figure this thing out, which I think at the end of the day, we're all trying to figure this thing out.
Yeah, hopefully, yeah.
But at the end of the day, I think it is important to us to talk to one another, no matter our beliefs, even if we are adamantly disagree with one another. I think the conversation is important.
Empathy is important.
And I don't think any less of you or more of you. Or does that make sense?
Yeah, it definitely makes sense.
And so I looked at them all and I said, you know what? I appreciate your perspective, but this guy's story is so interesting to me and so intriguing to me. I've got to hear it. And
thanks, man.
No, dude, it's been a pleasure having you on. So sorry to cut you off, but a lot of hatred and you lost some subscribers. So I guess you're not a part of that group much anymore now.
No, so that group kind of self-imploded a couple months before anyways, because a bunch of nasty rumors were started. So a lot of the people in the Hebrew Roots, not a lot, but there are many people in the Hebrew Roots movement, the Torah Observant movement, that are polygynists. So they have multiple wives and they're open to having multiple wives because the Old Testament they did. So when you toss the New Testament and stick to the Old, then you go back to like, well, why shouldn't we have more than one wife? And so there's a lot of people doing that right now, believe it or not.
I have an answer. I can barely keep up with one. I don't need
Well, honestly, I did a lot of marriage counseling. I wore so many hats when I was running that fellowship, and marriage counseling was one of those hats. And I'm here to tell you that most men I've met are not ready for. They need to work on the one they got.
No desire.
Yeah, they need to work on this relationship they already have. But
well, man, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on here. I'm so glad you took the time to talk to me and enlighten me on your steps through. One thing I did want to ask you in closing is, do you still believe in Jesus Christ, and in what capacity is that?
So I'm with a man called Dr. Richard Carrier in believing that there is a 33% probability that a man named Jesus did live and had probably had some impact on the local community, whether as a philosopher or maybe one of the. It's a long story, but there was a lot of messiahs coming up at that time trying to overthrow Rome physically, and so he may have been one of those resistance teachers that were. But his message was so different than the other messiahs. His message was to have peace and submit to Rome, and the other messiah's message was to kick Rome out. So I think that if he was real, physically, historically, then he probably taught those things, and I think that I don't think that we can accurately assume that anything in the Gospels is accurate, because the Gospel of Mark was written 40 or 50 years after Jesus would have left. So we see a lot of cases where historical figures become mythologized over time, and they become venerated, and there's more added and more added to their story. So I think that there is a 30% chance of that being true. But I don't think that he's...
go ahead, I'm sorry.
I don't think he's God or anything like that, no.
So do you feel, taking your answer and removing Christ from the equation, it's kind of hard to do in the Judeo-Christian way of thinking, because it's a cinder point, but
Right.
do you ever... So when I left the church for 22 years, and I had that fervent hatred of the church, I can tell you that there were many, 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 many times where I still felt that small voice, where I still felt that, just that voice in different situations, different things happening in my life, and things that played out in ways that they shouldn't have, but they did. And I had that small voice kind of pushing me in that direction. So the Bible tells us that's the Holy Spirit. Okay.
Right.
Do you still experience that?
So what I call that is synchronicities. And I do still experience synchronicities, and everyone on earth experiences synchronicities across every culture.
For the listeners, explain that term.
Okay, so synchronicity is what a Christian calls a confirmation, right? So you feel like God's trying to tell you something. You just read something just now, and then someone called you and they said the same word, or they used the same phrase, or they mentioned the same literature.
Confirmation.
It's a confirmation. God's trying to tell me something. Or, my husband, I just got done reading John 7, verse 7, and then I get in my car and the odometer says 7:7, and you're like, God's trying to show me something. Or even better, like maybe you pray for something, or really focus your attention and energy on something that you want to come into your life, and then it does, that's again a confirmation. But outside of Christianity, that's called a synchronicity. So synchronicities literally occur in every culture and in every religion and non-religious background. People, in my opinion, I feel like we can manifest reality around us. And I don't mean like like we're necessarily God the way Christians understand God to be, but, neuroscience has shown that we can actually attract things to us by focusing our energy and attention on those things, regardless of what you believe. Sure. The other thing was, the Holy Spirit is what we call our guilty conscience in many cases. But again, guilty conscience exists in every culture.
Sure.
Ever since humans, as far back as we can see, at least, ever since humans have been getting together and hanging out together, they've made rules for each other. They've tried to protect and save and help, and they were kind and they were compassionate, and they felt bad when they did bad stuff to each other. And these are inherent, ingrained things that are already in us. And I just don't think that you have to call it the Holy Spirit, but it's okay if you want to.
Sure. Now, let me tell you a story that just happened last week, and what I believe it to be, and then I want to hear your take on it, and we'll, like I said, start to wrap things up before my wife kills me for dinner time. Hey, I didn't get this figure by missing any meals, you know what I'm saying?
Oh, gosh.
So my son brought home what we know now to be what's called the coronavirus. What that is, you don't have to go to Wikipedia, look it up. It's most commonly understood as the common cold. It's a very contagious virus that is easily spread through schools and daycares and amongst us. Adults, when we get it, we usually get it harder than the kids do. And that's what I had yesterday when we were talking. On Friday, and it was miserable. But anyway, so Monday and Tuesday of last week, my son was very sick. And on Wednesday, they sent him home from school on Tuesday. On Wednesday, we had to stay home with him. And we got him in bed Wednesday night, and he was a mess. No fever, but just coughing. The poor kid, it felt like he couldn't get a breath from coughing. We were doing breathing treatments, albuterol, cough syrup, Vicks Vapor Rub, all of the things that you do. And about 2 a.m, after being up all this time, and he's coughing like crazy, my wife and I are like, do we need to take him to the ER? We'd already been to the pediatrician twice at this point. I thought, I'm going to take him downstairs, and I'm going to sleep with him in my recliner to where he's in an elevated position. And I could be there with him. So we get in my recliner. I get him situated on my chest. I'm holding him on my chest.
You're a good dad.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. And he's coughing. He's coughing. And one thing that worries me, and a pediatrician told us once with my daughters, they start feeling like constricted, like when they're coughing. And there might be something with the airways type issue. So I put my hand on his chest just to feel his breathing to make sure he wasn't constricted. And I put my hand on his chest. Now, Justin, I want to tell you, I've not told anyone else this story. I haven't even told my wife this story. You're the first person to ever hear this story.
Wow.
I put my hand on his chest, and I'm feeling his breathing. I'm like, okay, is he constricted? Is his airways constricted? Is he breathing good? And I felt, pray. And I went, okay. And I said, Lord, he's hurting. He's struggling. He's having a hard time breathing. If you can just touch his chest, touch his throat, and let us get a little bit of sleep, let him get a little bit of rest, please. In the name of Jesus, I pray, amen. Justin, my son, didn't cough again the rest of the night.
That's awesome. That's great.
Why is that?
He
went from coughing nonstop for 12, 14 hours. Nonstop. And I prayed for him in that moment. And he didn't cough again until like 8 the next a.m. when he got up and was running around like a crazy person. But so we can get into theology all we want, but at the end of the day, that's where I put my faith. And I love how you say faith is a verb. That for me is a confirmation that there is a God out there that listens to me.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Does that make sense? So what is your take on that?
I would just say that it's confirmation to me that you have the power to manifest healing, through your intentions and through your will. And we see Mormons and witches and voodoo people doing the same type of stuff.
I hope I'm not into voodoo.
No, it's
Don't
a good thing.
Anyone who is.
Yeah, I think there's natural explanations for stuff like that. I think we can do that. Yeah.
Well, Justin, I don't want to end it because I've had you almost 2 hours now, and that's 2 hours of my time, of your time. I'm so grateful.
I've enjoyed it.
I consider you a friend, my brother. I hope we can stay in touch. I hope you save my phone number and text me. If you want to do this again sometime, maybe I'll get some listeners to throw me some questions, and we can have you back on, and we can talk again. Before we leave, tell the folks where they can find you, your website, your TikTok, your socials. Sure, yeah. So on TikTok, I'm at Bullet Holes in the Bible. And on YouTube, I'm just Bullet Holes in the Bible. You can look that up, search it on the YouTube thing. And then I also have bulletholesinthebible.com as my website. So those are the best ways to reach me. And if you want to email me personally with a question or something, you can email me Justin at bulletholesinthebible. Justin, man, this was such a pleasure. I'm so grateful for you coming on. And I hope I get to know you more, get to know you better, and talk to you more in the future. So thank you for doing this. Oh, dude, anytime. I'm super impressed with your show and your demeanor and your approach to this. So I really thank you. I feel definitely safe to come back anytime. So awesome, let me know. Man. Thank you, brother. You have a great night. You too, man.